Hello, Megan Rosey.
Hello, Michelle.
Welcome to Sisters, a Rosie's Brain podcast. We are here today to talk all about distractibility. Oh, yes, and that ADHD, neurodivergent, neuroplush, neuroawesome brain of yours that we like to call Rosie's brain. Yes, we do. And
Yes, we do.
we are going to talk a little bit today about how hard it is for people with ADHD to sort of stick with paying attention, and that attention's an issue.
Yeah, I just had to turn on my do not disturb because someone tried to call me and I was like, what? So the struggle's real.
Oh, yeah. It also allows you to hyper focus too, though. So the same as like a double-edged sword. So we're going to talk about both of those today just a little bit. And then, we're going to talk about some of the strategies that you might have. So we always try to bring up a topic, some sort of story around it, then what your strategies might be. And then also, what our people in our community are doing. And you did a great job this week. You posted a bunch of things onto our website at rosiesbrain.com. So people can go check that out and give us a shout out there. And also let us know kind of what they're thinking, what their strategies are. So, all right, big picture. I want us to think about a time when you drifted away within the last week. Where your attention, all of a sudden you realized you were not paying attention. Can you think of one?
I mean, which one would you like me to talk about?
Well, I mean, since last time was all about the bathroom, could we just pick one that isn't all about the bathroom? I don't care which one you pick. Now that's all you're going to want to think about.
I mean, anytime I'm on my phone, I'll just end up getting so distracted and I'm like, wait, where am I? And then I come up for air like 2 hours later and I was like, what did I just do?
Oh, so not talking on the phone. See, I'm so 80s that I'm like, oh, you're talking on the phone with somebody and no, you mean like you're on your smartphone
Yeah.
scrolling through things.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's drifting away to you, or that's hyper focusing?
Huh. That's a good question. What's the definition of drifting away?
Oh, let's talk about that for a minute. Yeah. So in this book, Driven to Distraction, which is what I've been pulling these sort of symptoms, right? Things that are common for people with ADHD. They said there's sort of this involuntary, like you're trying to stay focused on something and you have an involuntary sort of like you drifted away. It's not something you're controlling, but
Mm,
you're on something, you're thinking about something, and all of a sudden you're thinking about something else. That's drifting away, I think.
interesting. Okay, I'm gonna need to process this one a little bit because I'm trying to
So I'm going to give you a scenario,
love
okay? And
it.
I want you okay, so you're at work,
Yeah.
right? Because I remember you saying that you had talked with your therapist this week, right? And they said, "Well, why were you talking all about the bathroom? Why didn't you talk about boredom at work?" And, so that was funny. And I was like really wishing she had been on the podcast last week because I would have liked to have talked about anything except for the bathroom the whole time. But so she said, so at work, would you consider the concept of drifting away to be something you could think of? That definition of like you're trying to pay attention to do something and all of a sudden your brain's going somewhere else.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that
I
place
mean,
for
I feel that way too.
sure.
Okay, so let's be honest.
Uh, yeah. It was okay. A couple of them that were, like, stressful for me was whenever
Okay.
I had to take any kind of a test.
Oh.
So, in the military world, there's a lot of these things called CBTs, which are, I think, computer-based technology,
Mm.
and you have to read a bunch of stuff or go through a bunch of modules and then get over, I think, like, 75 or 80% in order to say that you've passed it.
Mhm.
And a lot of them will be timed, and they don't have
Oh.
any kind of accommodations for people who are neurospicy, at least that I know of. I don't
Right.
I wasn't made aware of that. And I would be sitting there, and a couple of them were, like, active shooter
Oh.
drills and
Oh.
yeah,
Yeah.
like, stuff that you don't really normally think about, but every military person has been through all of this, and so as a civilian who's come into it never having done it before, I was like, wait, active shooter? Wait,
Right.
you know,
Right.
bombs and explosions and, all these crazy things that I had to, like, worry
Yeah.
about.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm giggling, but not it's not really funny, right? I mean, obviously, it's like it's a
Just
big
the
deal.
idea of me
Of you trying to, like, learn all of this is, yeah, pretty hilarious.
when I first got my job, Brian and the people in his squadron who are all active duty, they had a good little chuckle at the idea of a person who was just turning 40 entering the military world because of all of the stuff I was gonna learn, and I didn't understand it,
Yeah,
but now I do.
but boy, did you get an education, didn't you?
Oh, yeah, I
Oh,
did.
yeah. So you're in the middle I'm just, like, picturing you now, like, you're in the middle of active
Active
shooter
shooter training. Mhm.
training. Sorry, tutor, like, what would active tutor training be? I don't it's probably something I would do.
Yeah.
Okay, you're in active shooter training, and you're watching this thing on the computer,
Mhm.
which I would think would be very stressful maybe, or, like, you would really be attending to it. Is
Yeah,
that true?
I was trying to, like, I was taking notes at times because I was like,
Oh,
"Oh, what if
yeah.
like,
What if
what if
this
there is
happens?
an active shooter? Like, how am I gonna
Yeah,
remember this?" But
yeah.
also, I think with any of these, there was I mean, I think I took 20 or 30 of them just within a year. So
Mm,
and a lot of them were really dry and, oh, the
yeah.
government purchasing program, oh, that one was really dry. So
Okay.
I'd be working through this stuff, and the thing is I still have to retain enough of it in order to pass the test,
Yeah.
and it was incredibly stressful because, like, there were I don't know if that was the government purchasing one, there was one that there was, like, a time limit. It might have been
Oh.
just even applying for the job, there was a time limit on some of these questions that you had to do, and
Mhm.
so I'm just stressed out because 'cause I'm like, "Oh my god,
Yeah.
I always get double time because I'm that person," and so
Yeah.
trying to hyper focus on it was, like, really, really stressful, and I literally had to, like, will the ADHD gods and say, "Please do not distract me right now
Yeah.
because I don't have time to take my 5 minutes that I have and think about other things." But then inevitably, something would pop into my head based off of whatever the question was, or I'd be asking myself, and
Mm.
I think had I been younger, I would have said, "Oh my god, Megan, like, I would have just totally lost it, but being a bit older, I was just like, "Okay, back to
Back
it." I
to it.
had to keep doing it.
Yeah.
Now, if I had a little bit more time and it wasn't fully timed,
Mhm.
I remember just sort of sitting every once in a while on a specific screen and, like, just staring at it, like, "What am I doing with my life?"
So, okay, I wanna dig into this a little bit, dig into this brain of yours because, so I see the sort of visual of you with your giant cow eyes, like, staring at a screen because 'cause they're so beautiful and big, but and kind of just wandering, but I'm very curious, like, what's happening in your brain. So, like, for me, and I'll just use me as an example, I'm working on something and I'm getting tired
Mm,
working on it. I'll work on it for a while and I feel my brain kind of slowing down a little bit, maybe just kind of like needing a little break, a little brain break for whatever reason, right? But as I'm leaving it, I'm like, oh, I'm coming back to this. I'm just going to go walk for a minute and kind of, get my blood flowing and whatever. And then I'm going to come right back to this. But this is just, I just need a minute, right? So I would think that, when they say drifting away, that maybe like that's me drifting away, right? I'm
mm.
not going to be able to really focus right now. So I'm kind of drifting away, meaning I just need to get up and move and go do something else and come back to it. Is that what it feels like to you when you're like, if I'm saying or you're saying you're all of a sudden,
I think okay, when you stated that, I hold on, I just got distracted again. I need to put my I just saw I had texted you and then I didn't close the window and I was like, "Wait, someone just texted me? What?" and I got distracted. Okay, focus. Back to the topic.
Back to the topic of how you focus and that you drift away.
So there's obviously external stimulus that makes
Mhm.
me drift away, like makes me just flap away, like, oh.
So you
But
don't think of it as drifting, you're like, "I'm flapping away." Like,
well,
boom, gone.
there are times like when, yeah, it's clearly a flap away, like that right now. That was just me like recognizing that I'm reading this thing and thinking about it while trying to talk to you, and I'm like, I'm trying to answer the question that they asked. And okay, so for instance, one of our neighbors, their daughter's going to come over and clean our car.
Hmm.
So she's doing like a business. So I was like, okay, fine,
Business.
come on over and clean the car.
Clean the car.
And so she's asking, hey, are you available at 4 o'clock today? And so I'm listening to you reading this, trying to pay. I come back to focus attention. I was like, okay, I'll talk to her after I'm done. But then I start thinking about, well, okay, so what's happening at 4 and where will I be? And then I'm like, wait, back to Michelle. So I'm back to Michelle. And then and then eventually I was just like, I need to close this because it is absorbing me.
Yes.
But so there is that thing. I do feel that my brain gets fatigued, like you were saying,
Mhm.
but drifting is totally different.
Mm.
And the thing that came instantly into my mind was that it typically revolves around me having to do a task that I don't fully understand,
Mm.
or I don't understand why I have to do it that specific way, or like I'm forced to do it that specific way, like
Got it.
these
These tests.
CBTs.
Yeah.
I'm forced to do it that way, and it's not how I retain information. So, but I
Mhm.
have to do it. So then I'm trying to read it and I'm trying my best to understand it, but then I just don't get it. And so
Mm.
my brain's in not getting it can go to a pretty dark place of like, "Oh, you're so stupid, Megan," and like you just can't do anything
Mhm.
right. So I can drift that way, or I can also just be like, "What in the literal I'm so frustrated. I don't understand this." And I just kind of go blank. I'm like, this sucks. Uh,
Mm.
this is not made for me. I am not the target market, even though I
Mm.
have to do this. And I kind of go blank and I'm just like, this really sucks.
Ew, interesting. And then the space that you give is like your mouth open and you're just staring off to the left.
Uh huh. And then my
Wow.
eyes kind of glaze over
Mhm.
and nothing is going on in the head for a moment.
Mm. Interesting. So that's really different for you than feeling fatigued that you know when you're tired and your brain's tired, but that's not this. This is now, and it sounds like it really connects to your emotions very quickly.
Yes. Very
So
quickly.
it's like the drifting is somehow connected to an emotional response or to some self-talk that might be, like you said, self-talk that's hard. That's interesting. I'm curious if other people go through that with the concept of drifting.
Yeah. Cause, people, I think the thing I can kind of I've heard others talk about is like when someone, let's say you watch 2 people and they're at brunch or whatever, and one
Mm,
person's just talking on and on and on and on and not really connecting with you. And so
yeah,
you just kind of drift off a little bit and you're sort of, not, you could see people not engaged with that other person because they're
right.
not engaging with them. And I think I feel like that's kind of part of what happens is like whatever this task is I'm doing is not engaging with my brain,
Mm,
and it just provides it just provides an outlet for me to drift off because it's not tailored to how my brain thinks.
hmm. So it's as though there's somebody on the other side of the conversation that isn't really considering you for that moment,
Yeah.
and
And
so you can't engage with it.
yeah. And I I've lost the thought.
Did you did you drift away?
I think I did. Oh, what I was gonna say
Well, no,
is
I'm wondering, like, is this like a conversation you don't really wanna have 100%? And so,
no, was
you
that
know
I think if we were to go back and look at it, I think what it was is that I was about to say something, and then you put something else in there, and then I
Mhm.
didn't know what I was saying at that moment, and then I lost the train of thought.
Mhm.
So, that's part of the reason why I think we blurt. Like, we were talking about blurting for one point, is
Mm.
that if I don't get it out, I may not remember where I was at because my brain just works that fast, and I'm on to the next thing.
Mm.
But yeah, when I was trying to figure it out, like, I was trying to grasp it and it was just completely blank. Like, there was just nothing there, no visuals, nothing that I
Mm.
normally think of. Yeah, like, right now, like, it's just like, "Huh?"
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Interesting. So it can be when you're doing a task you don't wanna do, it can also be if you sort of get interrupted, it sounds like. Like, I
Mhm.
interrupted your train of thought, and so now you're drifting.
Yeah, because, like, I think if we look at the idea of what works for my brain, technically an interruption does do that, right? Like, it's not
Mm.
following with what my brain needs, and so I can just kind of drift off because 'cause I'm like, well, it's not there anymore," and I'm trying to engage, but then keep retaining the thing that I wanna say is not something I do well.
Mm.
So, I in order for me to engage with you, if you interrupt, then all of the words that you're saying is now cramming into, like, my RAM of my brain, and then it's forcing whatever it was I had out.
Mm.
Does that make sense? Like, if you
Yeah.
think of my brain as a computer, you know
Mhm.
how, like, you can, like, your RAM restarts every time it clears every time you restart your computer,
I don't
and
know that
it's
everyone knows that,
oh,
but
okay,
but that but you could tell us more.
so, like, in a computer, you have 2 different types of memory. You've got your long-term storage and your short-term storage. So the
Mm.
long-term storage is like your hard drives, and that's where that stuff just gets stored and you can always go back to it. Short-term memory is called RAM, and that short-term memory is easily cleared. So, like, if you close an application, it'll clear, like, the application will grab some of that RAM and it will hold on to it to be able to use for that application. So if
Mhm.
you've got 4 or 5 applications open, you're using a lot of RAM potentially.
Yeah.
And so when you close an application, then the RAM that it was allocated to that program then goes back and is available for other things. So what I was thinking about is, like, when I'm talking with you, same thing kind of with a CPU, but that's just getting into the weeds. Okay. So let's just say ish. Okay. It's not like a
Yeah,
full
ish. Yeah, don't
analysis, but
if you're like a computer nerd and you know all this stuff, then don't yell at her for making it simple for my brain. Okay.
yes. It's that time again, my fellow ADHDers. If you need a break, now's your chance. Grab a snack, go to the restroom, or if you're driving, don't do any of those things, but maybe just pause for a second. Otherwise, listen on to the wonderful world of computers that I'm about to talk about.
All right, continue on.
Okay, so for me, it's like in order to listen to you, it takes a lot of RAM for me to listen auditorily. 'Cause I'm not auditory. That's not
Right.
my strength. I think there are a lot of ADHD people who have auditory gifts.
Mm.
And so maybe verbalizing might be hard for them or writing might be hard for them or whatever it is. But for me, it's auditory. So if I'm listening to you, then I have to provide a lot of RAM and a lot of memory, short-term memory to that. So then if I'm on the train with you and I'm listening, then I now have a very small amount of memory left over to remember what it is I wanna say.
Mm.
So it's almost like it's getting bumped out, like the thought I have is getting bumped out if I get interrupted and it kind of goes off a little bit of a different direction, because not
Mhm.
all interruptions are the same, right? Some interruptions kind of are like you're agreeing with me, you're like, "Yeah, I'm interrupting," but, like, you can actually hear it in when I edit, I can hear it. I can hear my brain hiccup every time someone speaks. Not even just you, it's anybody
Mhm.
who's speaking. I like, my brain does a hiccup, and then I have to kind of regain where I'm at.
Mm.
So you hear me, like, repeat the same word, or I hear myself do a, because 'cause I'm trying to regain that thought.
Interesting. So I want to ask a question around this then. So is the interruption in the conversation again that's derailing you, not the agreeing with you one, right? It's derailing you. Is that the same as these tests? Are the tests derailing you? Is that the same and that's what's causing the drift or is it different?
Yeah, I would say it's, like, some kind of stimulus that is causing this drift. So, it can be external, right? It could be, there's a fan on and my hair is hitting my face in a weird way. That's distracting me. It can be someone interrupting me if I'm talking with them. It can be, um, the emotional toll of my life and having to take tests and how hard it's been for a very, very long time, and so I have a little bit of PTSD from all of that, and then my brain and my thoughts and my emotions take over and they distract me. So
Mm.
I think it can come in a lot of different ways, which is why it's hard because it's not always the same thing. Like, I
Mm.
got into bed last night and I have a fan on that I love 'cause it cools me down, and then but I can't sleep with it directly on me because it like, my little baby hairs just sort of fly and they hit my face, and it drives me crazy. So I have to face it downward so that I can
Yeah.
still get the airflow, but not the direct air. Or I have to wear like a hair wrap.
Oh my
So,
gosh. I would just love to see you in your hair wrap. But
oh my
anyway,
gosh, I look
continue.
like Mother Teresa, I kid you not. Like this little old white Portuguese lady. I don't know if Mother Teresa was
Oh,
Portuguese, but I totally
yeah.
look
So
ridiculous.
cute. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh. Love it. So, okay, so when you're whatever thing has distracted you now, and sometimes it's emotional, sometimes it's physical, sometimes it's an outside stimulus
yeah.
is distracting you, and that's causing you to drift. And you've described it as like there's nothing going, you're glitching, there's nothing going on in your brain at that point, no visuals. You're just now trying to like you're kind of lost a little bit or like not grounded in your thoughts or how would you describe it?
I think I just describe it blank.
Blank.
Like
Mm.
I'm just like right now, I'm just blank.
And
I don't
is there an emotion that goes with that or is it just nothingness? I mean, I could imagine that would feel for me would feel anxiety producing potentially.
I think it's subject by subject, case by case, because if I've had a lot of trauma around the issue, around the subject, then yeah, like a test for me brings up a lot of trauma.
Mm.
When I'm talking to you and like and I get interrupted, I think back in the day I would have been frustrated maybe, but now it's like I focus more on radical acceptance. So it's like, well, if I don't remember it, then it probably wasn't important.
Right.
But yeah, I think there can be emotion, but the purest form of it, if it wasn't ever really, I don't know how to say this, if it wasn't ever really graced by any trauma, the purest
Mhm.
form of it is just blank. Like
Mm.
I am constantly thinking, constantly processing. It's hard to fall asleep because of it. So to not have anything in my head for a moment is like weird. But I
Mm.
also feel like sometimes I need that. Like mom was visiting
Mhm.
and it was fantastic and we had a great time and I was doing we cleaned my kitchen, my fridge.
Mm.
And it was we just chose the hottest day of her stay to do that, and I was making hard-boiled eggs at the same time. So, it was like
A lot going
it
on.
was a lot going on. and I could just feel I needed to deconnect from everything after that. I
Mm.
was like I tried to push myself as much as I could, and then we, like, watched a show or whatever, but I felt the next day that I was, like, zapped
Mm.
and needing to just drift off into a land that had no one connecting with me, and, like, okay, I've been wondering, you know how they talk about introvert, extrovert?
Yeah.
And I have always been, like, on the scale of 1 to 26 of extrovert, I'm like a 25.
Right, right.
But maybe I'm like, could you be a false extrovert? Because
Yes,
is
I
it
believe
true?
this is true. I learned this during the pandemic. I think I was a trained extrovert, and I'm actually much more introverted than I give myself permission to be.
Ah,
But I mean, it's all about where you get your energy from, right? And so I think like sometimes there's certain tasks with certain people that can drain me more than you know what I mean? So I
yeah,
don't know, but I do think that. I think we were trained to be much like the military, right? Like you're trained to and sorry, mom, you weren't like militant. I'm not saying it, but we were trained to like when people were with us that we were going to be polite. Like I just yelled at my son the other day, Josh, because his friend was leaving, and I was like, "You walk him to the door and you say goodbye." You know, like I'm like, then I'm like, where is this coming from? Like what?
that's totally the Portuguese in us.
Yeah, yeah. So it's like you say goodbye, you do the things. You're always, especially especially if you have somebody at your home,
Yeah.
there's these things that you do that you might expend more energy. But I do think we were trained extroverts in that sense.
Mm.
Yeah. So I'm curious, what strategies do you use when you like you know, having a day off or disconnecting when you have time to do that is nice, right? And good and kind of nice that your brain can do that actually. But strategies might you have when you do need to like finish that test that like you said when you were younger would have been really hard for you to do?
I think those are the moments where I have to dig deep
Mm,
and know my why,
mm,
know why I have to figure out a way to dig deep because for a while it was like we needed extra money, and so I was like, I'm there, I've got this, and I knew exactly why I would get up at 5 a.m., 4:30 a.m. to be at work by 6 or be at work by 6:30. I knew why I was doing that, and when it was really, really hard, I would acknowledge it was hard and then say, okay, radically accept this is what you got to go do.
mm,
And that was a huge part of it. I think in the past I would have just given up,
hmm,
or I would have procrastinated so long that I either missed the deadline or I got in trouble.
mm,
And I think that's kind of I think in the beginning that's what would have happened. That's why I didn't do well in school, and I struggled with just connecting because I just was it just became bigger and bigger and bigger, you know? It's
hmm,
like like my friend Teek, she called and I forgot to call her back. And then after having another day of not calling her back, and it's like, oh, I see the voicemail and I'm like, oh shoot, I didn't call her back. And then another day, and then another day goes by, and it just becomes this giant,
mm,
you fucked up, Megan. It's you know, you
mhm,
and then I like worried she's going to be upset with me, and all of this anxiety comes in, and so then it's just like easier to, in a weird way, it in my mind it seems like it's easier to just brush it off than to actually act on it, because the act of
mhm,
acting, the
mhm,
it it feels too big.
mm,
And today I just had to I was thinking like, well, how do I tell her? And like, what do I do? And do I make all these excuses? And it's like, just tell her what happened. Just be
yeah,
honest. But I
yeah,
couldn't do that when I was younger. I
sure,
I literally ghosted a job once
mm,
in New York City because I just could not have that conversation of like, here's what I need, and this is not working out, and I just told them I was sick, and I was sick for 3 months, and then I think they just got the hint that I wasn't coming back.
You never told them. Oh my gosh.
Nope.
It
Nope,
was
it was
just
just
too
like,
much.
"I'm just
Yeah.
sick," and I was like, "I'm not even in not even in New York anymore."
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
like
You're like, I actually left the country, so
yeah,
sorry about that." But, I think when you're saying that, it makes so much sense to me that one of the things they talk about in this book, Driven to Distraction, is how important education around ADHD is. Educating yourself, educating your family, educating your workplace. And I think those things are so important because when you think about it, there wasn't language around this for us as a family. There wasn't language for you around this. We knew you had it, and I think others in your generation might, it might be similar, but there wasn't this idea that this was a family or a village conversation, and that if we could talk openly about the flaps and about I'm just blanking out right now what that means and what that feels like, and I need to just disconnect for a minute. I need to reset. And it's really interesting to me, like, as I'm learning more about this, and you and I are learning more about it together on this podcast, even, I think we're being more honest and more open and having this real conversation around what's working for you.
yeah,
And that was never something that ever was even a question. It was, how is Megan going to fit into this round hole, this square peg and round hole kind of thing? Not how are we going to, as a group, make adjustments and make sure that who she is can fit in. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And I would think those tests of military, that would not be something. I mean, it was probably in your face is so funny. If anybody's watching it, I mean,
mm-mm.
you have just the look of, like, disdain and boredom and frustration and slight bit of anger. Like, it's like all the things coming across in your face right now.
Well,
But,
Brian asked me this morning because I now that we're finally settled here, and I'm like, "Okay, I need to probably get some part-time work or something to bring
yeah.
some more money in," and he's like, "Oh, would you ever apply to USA Jobs again?" And I was like, "No,
No, never.
I'm
Military and I, not
military
friends.
and
We're
I am
not
good."
doing
He
it.
says, "Yeah, that's actually probably a good idea because all of your bosses and the people you work with, like, especially." Oh, no, I said, "I would if it was with current active duty, but I wouldn't
Mhm.
work with vets right now because the
Oh.
the crew from there's a specific era of DEI that has finally kind of come around in the current military, and they talk more, and they actually are more open, and they have
Mhm.
discussions about mental health and about, all of the things like things that you need in order to be successful. And
Mhm.
the vets prior to that, not all, this is not an but a
Yeah.
a majority
Wasn't
of
common.
them.
Wasn't a
Yeah,
common
it wasn't
conversation.
a common conversation, so it's like,
And in fact, it was, like, told to them not to do it,
yeah,
right? Like,
just
you
suck it up.
can't admit you need counseling, you can't admit you need help or mental health stuff
Right.
like that.
So
Yeah.
for me to come in, it's like I did it and I figured it out, but it's such a hard place for me to physically be.
Mm.
Mentally, emotionally, physically. It's a challenge. And so I was like, yeah, I think I'm okay.
I might be able to figure out an environment that's a little bit better for me. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
for sure. I'm very curious, people in our community, if they experience what you experience in terms of the drift.
Mm,
I've never, I can't say I've never felt it the way you're saying it, but I did have an experience the other week where I definitely was sort of, it was an unexpected interaction that I was having, and it was quite kind of volatile. Actually, it felt aggressive, and I remember kind of having that sense of, I don't have a thought in my head right now. But that was more of like PTSD, like a kind of
dissociation.
dissociation or something. And so I was wondering, if other people, I think that might be different than what you're saying.
Well, I was gonna say that dissociation probably mirrors it, is at
Mm,
least in the context that I'm talking about right now.
mm-hmm.
That I was about to say, like, yeah, maybe think about if you're dissociating because that is it kind of feels that way. It's like you're just
Mm.
drifting off, but I'm remembering that I'm doing it, so I think it's a little bit different that, like, in dissociation, you just
Like,
forget that it happened. Like, your brain actually forgets that it happened.
yeah, and I don't know that I was, like, fully dissociating, but I felt myself wanting to pull away and, like, kind of forcing myself back in the moment that I needed to be present for, but it was interesting when you were talking about that because it seems also like it happens so much more frequently for you and that it's not in your control. And so oftentimes, right? And so I think that's the part that it was interesting. And the interruption piece too, because I'm pretty bad at interrupting. So I could imagine like all the whole time, like every podcast, you're like, yeah, whatever. Now I don't know where we are. But so we should probably have like an interrupting cow kind of clue of like, yeah, like she did it again. There goes Michelle. Um,
Well, and as we're talking about this, I think there's also another form of drifting, and again, I think it'd be interesting to talk about this as I learn more about it, because
mhm,
I don't know if this is truly what they're talking about, right?
mhm,
Because like there's also a part of me that drifts off into something completely different because of just visually seeing something, or if I'm looking at there's like a blue light right now on my USB, whatever this is, a USB adapter. And so that blue light can then trigger other thoughts and memories. And so, like, when I was talking about the lime,
mm.
and it's sort of like, I wouldn't call that drifting. I would call that one just like lime. But it's this idea that like there are certain stimuli that kind of my brain just sort of veers off into that lane for a bit, and then it comes back, right? Like I
Mhm.
have a mug here that has, I don't know, like a little
Little
tree,
tree with stars on it. Yeah, it's
and
cute.
it's pink. And so I was sitting here looking at it, and then I as I'm talking with you, like, my brain kind of sometimes goes off and says like, "Oh, this little tree," and I start kind of having a
Mhm.
little story about it.
Mm.
And then but I'm doing that simultaneously as I'm listening to you. So that one doesn't
Interesting.
necessarily pull me out of it, but, like, if I get really fascinated or if I haven't seen it before, like that
Mm,
text message that came in, I hadn't seen it before. I've seen this mug before, so the mug only lets me kind of just wander into
mm.
the world of ADD.
That's sorta interesting. I think that would be interesting to come up with the vocabulary for that, that there's sort of like a wander, a little walkabout, you know what I mean? And versus like drifting and like this idea that, I think when you think of like a car and it's drifting, it's like it's sort of slightly going off the road, but not completely. It's coming back, like drifters, they'll like turn a corner fast and they're drifting. So they drift off a little bit, but they're still staying on the road versus like really going blank, like black. That's a really sharp, like staccato kind of thing. So it's interesting to think about that as like ways of describing different types of drifting.
Yeah, because if I'm thinking of that visual of the car driving,
Mhm.
I'm trying to think, like, so if I'm bored, my mind just kind of drives itself off its own place.
Mm.
So
It's like a self-driving car.
yes, it's a self-driving brain. The the worst of that was when I would be bored and I wouldn't have anything. I've done all my work, and I'm my job is to be at this desk for 8 hours, and I'm not allowed to leave. Like, I can leave for
Mm,
certain things, but I'm mm, you know, my boss comes to find me and to make sure I'm still there, and that's how they know if I'm working or not.
mm,
And so when there's nothing to do because you've done all the tasks and you're just waiting for the next task, that's incredibly boring.
mm,
And
mm,
for a while, I would just kind of stare off and sort of, I had these pictures that you got me of, it was like a landscape, and I would just stare off and kind of imagine myself being at a beach and walking on the beach and just going into my own little fantasy world.
Mm.
Sometimes I would listen to the hum of the F-16 engines running, and I would just kind of think about that and, like, what wonder what that space looks like, and, what would
Mhm.
happen? How big is it? And where would I be? And I would just go into a whole,
Hmm.
I ended up getting these, like, Josh, got me your son got me these magnets that were like cats, and they're just, like, hanging on and stuff, and so, like, I would put googly eyes on them, and I would, like, make all these stories. Like, I had one cat with a googly eye hanging off of, like, a helicopter that I was trying to learn the name of, and I would take all the names of the planes, and I'd put them up on the wall, and I would write their names so I wouldn't forget them.
Mm.
And I could start learning them, and so then I would put the cats on there doing, like, the stupid, like, one cat's, like, trying to, with a fighter helicopter, like, "Ah!" Like, it's
Like,
gonna get
going
some.
after it. Oh my
Yeah,
god, that's so funny. That's
and
so
then,
funny.
so I just would do silly things like that to keep my brain going, because like, I would just, like, veer off into these, like, little stories
Mm.
and just anything to make me not wanna poke my eyes out. This is why I started doing puzzles at work, because I was
Yeah,
like, "I
something.
You want me to be here,
Yes.
so I
So,
have
I am
nothing to
trying.
do,
Yes, yes.
and since I am a resilience trainer, I will do a puzzle so people can come." And I actually had quite a few people, these, like, old
Yeah,
crusty ex-sergeants, whatever they were,
yeah.
like, they would come in and they would work on a puzzle with me, or they would play with some beads that I had hanging up, or, whatever it was, because
There
that's
wasn't
what.
enough to do.
Mhm.
Yeah. It's so interesting. I think for me, as you're talking about this, I'm just so curious other people's view of what drifting off would be. Anyone who's
Mm,
got ADHD and or that neuro spicy awesomeness, like what does that mean to you? Because I didn't even think to define it before we started, but it seems like there's so many versions of it and kind of what their strategies are. I love that you talked about your puzzles again. That's been such a huge strategy for you and play, and having fun and making silliness out of something that actually could be quite difficult, right? Of boredom and
really,
and whatnot. Yeah,
really difficult.
really difficult. Well, thank you so much for spending time with me today,
Thanks for having me.
talking about your awesome driftiness.
My driftiness is the most drifty of all drifts.
Yes, and you're like driftitude.
I'm driftoramic.
Yes, you are.
Driftosaur I'm a driftosaurus.
You're drifterific.
I'm driftorific.
Oh.
I'm a drifterarian. Drifterarian. I don't know. Mom will come up with something, and
Yeah.
she'll Oh, do you
Flap.
know that Flap, do you know that mom came up with the greatest phrase for us? So you know how we do our tomatoes?
Yeah, tomatoes is a unit of time for us,
Mhm.
right? And so Megan tells me how many tomatoes she's gonna get done in a day
Yeah, so
of
tomatoes
work.
is a 25-minute unit of time,
Yeah.
and so I had to go work on some stuff, and mom says, Okay, are you gonna go garden?" I was like, "Yes, I am!"
I'm
Because
gonna garden.
it's genius, because, okay,
Yeah.
if I say, "Hey, I gotta go do a tomato," that means I'm gonna go and come right back, but
Yeah.
if I have to go gardening,
Yes.
then I'm gonna be in it for a while. I'm gonna be in the weeds, literally.
In the
Ah!
weeds.
It's so
That's so awesome.
good.
It all comes together. Okay, so by the way, you did tell me this earlier, like a couple days ago. And so I told Cheryl, who,
Yeah.
is at work, and she's been starting to do tomatoes, which is super awesome.
Good
So
for you.
she
Wait, good for you, Cheryl.
I
Good
know, go
gosh.
Cheryl. And I was like,
Rockstar.
"Hey," yeah, I was like, "Hey, what are you up to?" She's like, "Oh, I'm already 2 tomatoes in today." And I like she said it as though that was like a normal thing we say at work. And then
Yes,
I'm like, "Oh my gosh, she's
Cheryl.
listening to the podcast. That's so cool." So anyway, I went as soon as you had told me about this, I went and I told her and I went, "Oh my gosh, this is the greatest thing. Like if you're going to do a bunch of tomatoes, then my mom and my sister are now calling that gardening." So I was like, "I love
Oh.
it." Like, "Oh, I love that." So anyway, well, love you so much.
I love you too.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for joining us on another episode of Sisters, a Rosie's Brain podcast. I am back on script and trying not to get too distracted. This series has us focusing more specifically on ADHD and all of its symptoms, and we're doing a deep dive into a list that we got from the book Driven to Distraction. If you enjoy the episode as much as we enjoy laughing with each other, please make sure to share it with someone you think would benefit from the conversation. Make sure to follow us on whatever platform you're currently listening to so that you can get notified each week. Now, next week, we'll be talking about how ADHD people have something special about them, in full giant air quotes. And no, I'm not talking about the short bus special, but the fact that we're smart, intelligent, and just all around awesome. Michelle, I think we may need to start redefining the short bus.
Yes.
Okay, but until then, here's to a great end of the week, and remember, stay curious. I was thinking of When Harry Met Sally. It's like...
Oh, pecan pie.
Pecan pie.
I don't remember what.
Pecan pie.
I decided I'm going to talk like this for the rest of the evening.
Like this?
Like this.
No. Like this. Pepper.
Peppers with my paprikash.
Peppers with my paprikash. That sound better.
Yeah.